Hello and welcome to the next in my Battle Games in Middle-earth Terrain series. Thank you for joining me. This week we're going to be looking at magazine number 4, and the terrain build in this magazine is a basic hill. Now in a short while I'll point down at the magazine and show you the instructions, but first of all let me explain that what I'll be doing is following these instructions but also doing a more advanced technique, as seems to become my habit in this, to show you some maybe slightly more developed techniques for terrain building, so you can do the very simple idea which comes in the magazine, or stretch yourself a little bit and do something a little bit more advanced. So without any further ado, let's go and have a look at that magazine. So here we have it, the modelling workshop for making a hill. The items that you'll need is PVA glue as per usual, some flock which you can make yourself or buy, a large paintbrush or a small one if you want to take a bit longer, a craft knife which is used for cutting, green, black and white acrylic paint, a junior hacksaw, though I think probably we won't be using a junior hacksaw because no, coarse sandpaper, again might use it, might not, a sheet of expanded polystyrene. Now I'm undecided whether I'm going to use expanded polystyrene simply because of the mess it makes. It is far better to use the harder blue foam, which has a smaller grain and sounds better and cuts better and doesn't cause quite so much mess. But we'll see. I may go with the expanded polystyrene for the basic hill. A handful of small garden pebbles and a marker pen. So what we'll do is when we'll gather that together, we'll make a start on step 1, which is cut out the shape. I will gather my materials and see you back in a very short video while. I've gone away and gathered some materials. This is about 5 cm thick polystyrene, and we're going to go for step 1. Step 1 says cut out the shape, which is pretty obvious. Use a marker pen. I've got myself a black Sharpie here. Mark out a roughly circular shape on the surface of the styrene foam sheet. Rather than marking out an exact circle, mark out a rough oval shape so that the hill is less symmetrical and therefore looks more realistic. The hill shown is approximately 24 centimeters, 12 inches in diameter, but you can make yours any size or shape you wish. So let's do that first. So roughly 24 is about yay big. You can't really see because that's about yay big. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of a kidney bean shape, a little bit of an interesting shape to this hill. So I'll take my pen and I'll just start drawing. Isn't that an awesome shape for a hill? So it then says, carefully cut out your chosen shape from the foam sheet using a junior hacksaw. Now, A, I don't have a junior hacksaw, and B, I wouldn't use it if I had one. What I'm going to use instead is my sharp knife, my Stanley knife. It actually is a Stanley knife, I think this. Yes, it is, look. It says Stanley on it. There we are. Now the trick with this stuff, which I don't really use very often and I'm only using because it says so in these instructions, is it does actually bobble quite a lot. However, if you notice there, that cut there that I just did, because I'm doing it at a very shallow angle, it's actually not bubbled. So that is how you can cut through polystyrene, do a very, very shallow cut, a very shallow angle of attack, and it will cut through fine. Like that. Now actually I probably need to have a longer blade. I've used it a few times and snipped a few down, so it's probably not going to be quite as good. But I'll get this cut out, I'll put some music on, and I'll leave it filming so you can see how I do it. And we're going to end up with this shape here cut out of this polystyrene block. there you have it, and there you can see why I really don't work with polystyrene very often. It has a lot of static energy, so it sticks to you and it gets everywhere. So what I'm going to do now is turn the camera off and tidy up. But you'll notice that I ended up carving out small sections, and that's how I had to do it because of the way that it works. It's really horrible. Another alternative would be to use a hot wire cutter. I decided not to do that for two reasons, one of which is that the instructions don't say to use a hot wire cutter, and the other one is that actually it's dark and cold and I'd have to open the window and put a fan on and do all sorts of stuff, and I just didn't want to do that. So I'm going to tidy myself up, clean up, and we'll do the next step. So that's cut out as you saw, and I've tidied up with a little bit of a hoover, but I'm going to have to do more because Rose is asleep next door and I can't really hoover as much as I want to. Did I mention that I hate polystyrene? I did actually manage to slice my finger open while cleaning the blade on the Stanley knife, so do be very careful. Fortunately it wasn't very deep, but it could have been worse than it was, so very, very careful when you're using these tools. So the next step is angle the sides. That's step 2. Once you have the basic shape of the hill, you will need to cut its edge with a hacksaw to create the slope of the hill. This can be a messy process. Oh, yay. Remember to protect your working area with plenty of newspaper. That's probably not a bad plan, so I might actually go and get some newspaper and set it down before I carry on. Cut the angle at about a 45-degree angle, or you can make the sides as steep or gentle as you wish simply by adjusting the angle you cut at. When using the hacksaw, be careful to keep your fingers away from the blade. Yes, Beard approves of that safety message. So I'm going to turn off very quickly and dress the desk with newspaper and come back. What I will point out though is I have turned this upside down. So this is the better edge, and I'm going to bevel away to this side, which is a slightly less smooth side, so that it will sit flatter on the table. So that's what I've done. So I'll be back very shortly. I'm back. I have newspaper, I have knife, and I have maybe the beginnings of a clue, so we'll see. So the idea that I'm going to come up with is it's going to have quite a smooth path in here, and it's going to have maybe a steeper edge over here, so that it can be, but it's going to be quite easy to access. I don't want it to be too much of an impediment for movement, but I do want it to be an impediment for sight. So we're going to start cutting. I'm going to hopefully not make so much mess. I'll turn some music on so you can't hear me swearing. So there we are. I think I've finished carving briefly for now. I may do a little more later. But what the concept is, and this is what I'll say at this stage, keep the concept in your mind. What the concept is that you've got some paths coming up over the top and then a high point on this end. And that's what you can see here. So I might actually shave that down a little more so it's a little bit more of a difference. Potentially on a more advanced build I might actually stick another layer on top there to make that even more prominent. But for now, I'm going to actually just trim that down a little more, so I will put some music back on and keep going. Now I am done, even if only to get rid of this blasted polystyrene. I'm going to tidy up again and I'll be back as soon as I don't have it sticking to my hands with static energy. Ugh. This build just keeps getting more and more joyful. The next step, it says, is to smooth the sides. Next, the sides of the hill need to be sanded, hey, to ensure a smooth rise from the base to the flat top. Using a coarse grade sandpaper, I have some here, grade 120, which I think should be enough. Gently sand the sides of the hill. This is also quite a messy process. Yeah, no shock there. Because of the fine dust you will create, you should always sand in a well ventilated area. I will put my breathing mask on. Once the sides are nice and smooth, gently sand the top of the hill. Okay, so this is so that the paint and glue adheres more readily to a rough surface. Now I've got a pretty rough surface already, so all I'm going to do is take the bubbles off, because I'm going to do a slightly different, I'm going to kind of go away from the instructions a little bit when it comes to the next step, because I want this to last, and I've got a good idea to show you, which I don't think that, I think you should always use basically. I don't think there's any reason for you not to do this technique. So yeah, I will do this slightly differently. But for now, I'm going to, pray for me, I'm going to loosely sand this to get rid of the bubbles. There we are. That's that done. More tidying and I'll be back shortly. Yeah. So the next step in the magazine is number 4. We're flying through this. Painting your scenery. Let me read out what it says to you, and then I'll tell you why I'm not going to do what it says. Now paint the hill green. It does not matter what shade of green paint you use, but you should use the same shade for all your scenery so that it gives a uniform look on the table. This is the first thing I strongly disagree with. Avoid using spray paints as they contain chemicals that react badly with styrene foam, causing it to warp and melt. That is very true. If you can still see the colour of the foam through the paint, then wait until it is dry and apply another coat. That makes some sense. So, let me tell you why I'm not going to be painting this hill green, and I'm not going to be trying to keep my terrain looking uniform. Look outside your window. Grass is not all the same colour, hills are not all the same colour, so trying to make all of your terrain look the same is very, very silly. Secondly, look at mud, look at grass, look at what's underneath the grass. It's not green. So what I'm going to be doing is using brown paint first before I flock over the top. This will give a much nicer finish and doesn't really change the instructions very much apart from to make it not look rubbish. The thing that I'm going to do in addition is I'm going to use my very finely sifted, and when I say very finely sifted, I mean very finely sifted sand, and I'm going to paint on the glue, paint on the terrain mix here, and then I'm going to scatter the sand over the top. Now I will put a link to the video that shows you how I make this, but briefly it is paint mixed with PVA and a bit of water and some washing up liquids just so it doesn't go off, and I use this for pretty much all my builds. It's the colour I believe is chocolate, and it works really well for a generic soil colour. So I'm going to start on this. It's going to take a little while. I'll put some music on and you can see what it looks like. I have a big bucket there full of sand. Let me actually show that to you just so you can actually see. It's very, very finely sifted. I will do a video at some point on how I prepare my stone and sand. So here's some music. Okay, I'm going to come back in now with some more talking and explain what I've done. So I've gone around the edges because obviously, as you saw, it was quite hard for me to hold, and by doing the edges first I was always able to kind of claw and grab over. Now that I've done the edges and done the sides and the underneath, I can paint the top without having to touch it. So that's the reason why I've done that. What I'm going to do is turn the camera off very briefly, gather up all this sand that's on the newspaper and get it back into the bucket. The reason for that is this probably next step will drip some more paint, and any time the paint gets into your collected sand, it will coagulate, it will dry very quickly, and you end up with lumps in your sand bucket, which is not, it's not as pleasant as it sounds even, it's a bit annoying. So I'm going to do a quick tidy, a quick clean, and I'll be back. You probably noticed that I try to stay on top of this tidiness, and that's another top tip. Always clean up, because if things get into a mess, then you'll find it harder and harder to stay on top of it, and eventually you won't be able to do any work at all. So I'll just pop the camera off, and I'll be back to finish off painting this in a very short while. There we are, that's better. I have been able to tidy my area. So now I'm going to come back in with the same stuff, the same brown paint and the same sand, and I'm going to do the top. Here's some music. And there you have it. That now will be left to dry overnight. I won't work on that wet now. What I did was I worked around and found a good place for me to hold it, left that bit till the last, and now I've finally finished it off. What I can now do is carefully pick it up and hopefully without causing too much damage, spread that off, yes, and then I'll be able to move this to a warm place where it can be left to dry, and we'll come back and do the next process on this tomorrow. Now we come to do my more advanced hill, and what I'm going to be using is this style of insulation foam rather than the bubbly stuff, and I much prefer working with this. They work with it in a very similar way, but what it does mean is that you don't get quite as much mess, and I do try to stay tidy, and that polystyrene stuff does my head in. So we're going to follow roughly the same patterns that we did before, but what I'm going to be doing is a multi-level hill, and it's going to be a little bit more interesting. I'm going to have a few more elements to it that will just separate it from just being a hill. So we'll use the black Sharpie to mark out the shape of the hill, and I'll use the same knife to cut it down. So I will film as much of this as I think is interesting in terms of cutting out and marking, but I won't duplicate too much from the first part of this video because, well, that's just boring, but I will be including what I think is useful. What I would like to point out is the angle at which I'm holding the blade. I'm deliberately doing this, so I'm actually beveling as I go. I'm actually pointing it in slightly because this will be the bottom and the other side will be the top. So there we are. I actually didn't bevel enough at this edge, so I'll quickly do that now. There we are. You'll see how much easier that was to cut than the original one, than the first one. So what I'm now going to do is I'm now going to build this up into a slightly more interesting shape. And as with the first one, I've got a concept in my mind, which is why I drew the shape that I've got done, which I'm going to follow. So the concept is I'm going to have some kind of potential, this is what I'm thinking at the moment, this might not last, but at the moment I'm thinking of having some kind of a waterfall or something coming down the cliff here. And I'm thinking about having that, so basically you're going to have a path which will start here, it'll go round and up to the top. So it'll be like an S-shaped path, and then there'll be something quite high up over on this peak here, which will be maybe a little pool, which will have a waterfall flowing off of it. So it'll be kind of like a sacred place or something like that, you could think of it like that. But that's the concept. So for that, I'm going to need to be building multiple layers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gather together some more foam, and I will invite you back once I've finished off doing my cutting, and I'll show you what that looks like. I'll spend some time on and off carving away at some blue foam and also some much hated polystyrene, as you can see, and I've got a shape I'm happy about. You can see that there's a path that goes up, like I said, and it comes to a steep area at the end where you're going to have some steps and it's going to go up to something on top. Now there may be some more polystyrene to go on this, but what I need to do now, really, I'm happy with what I've got, is glue it in place and then sand it down. So I have my gator glue, and I will be using weights and clamps to secure everything in place. So I'm not going to do this on camera because it's a bit fiddly and messy, but I'll come back when I have done. It's been a couple of hours and this is now gone off, I think. So I'll take the weights off. As you can see, this is about the only use that my exercise stuff gets nowadays, sadly. But they do well for sticking down the gator glue. And that's now stuck securely, and I'm happy with that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to think about the extra bits that I might want to add to this, just to raise up some of these areas. I might decide to tail that off a little bit. I'm also going to look at sticking on and making a cliff, because I want to have a bit of a cliff on this edge here, and I will invite you back when I do that. I'll do that with my awesome technique using tree bark. But first of all, I'm going to look to extend these areas a little bit, just so that it's a little bit more natural. Maybe it kind of the hill kind of still extends here a bit and extends here a little bit and extends around here a little bit. So there. So I'll get on with that, and when I'm finished with that and I'm about to do the bark, I will invite you back. With all of that now set, I'm now working on the cliffs. Now the technique I use for cliffs is bark. And what I'm doing at the moment is I'm going through my big box of bark, dried bark, that I've had for quite a long time, and I'm trying to find bits that will fit and will work around where I want the cliffs. So I want the cliffs around this white bit, which is where the whole thing leads up to, and potentially going along here as well. So what you can see is I've got a couple of pieces that are here, and I've got some more which I've broken off, which are going to fit quite nicely there and there, and I've got a bit here which is actually going to manage to fit in there, and I will probably put some more in underneath as well. I'll be gluing this in place using my gator glue, and then I will be clamping across, certainly for these I'll be clamping it in place so that it will dry, and that's what I'm going to be getting stuck into. Now I'm not going to film myself breaking apart bits of bark and just offering it up, because I don't know how long this is going to take me, and it could be quite a tedious thing to watch. But once I've got all of the jigsaw in place, once I know what's going on, then I'll come back and I will show you how I go about gluing and clamping, and then you'll see why I'm doing it with bark. It works very well. I really like this technique. I use it a lot. So I'll get on with that, and I will invite you back when I have something more to show you. I do really like this technique, but it is very messy. It seems that this is a little bit of a theme of this video, lots and lots of mess. What I've done is I've put in place the bits of bark that I think work, and unfortunately I've found some that are awesome but just don't, so I'm going to think of another bit of terrain to make with that. My mind is whirring. And I'm going to attempt to glue them in place and clamp them. I've clamped them in for now without any glue on. I have actually glued this one because I needed it done. This goes off very, very quickly as it happens. It takes about 30 minutes. So what I'm going to do is put in place some of the pieces now while you're watching, and then come back and glue some more on and do this over the evening. And I probably won't video the entire process, but I thought I would show you how this works and how easy it is with the gator glue. So let's do this long piece here, which I have loosely wedged in. You can see everything falls down. So that is going to go, and is going to be, I've snapped it very lightly there. This is just picked up off the floor probably a few years back now. It's been sat in a drawer drying. It's not special wood. We have wood burners, as you've seen in my videos. And what I'll do is I'm just going to put a lot of gator glue, because I will be using Luke's compound on this later to fill in gaps and etc. But if you've watched my other videos, the Ruin Watchtower, you'll know that sticking this on with Luke's terrain gunk doesn't actually work. So that, I need some at the top, a bit more. It's more just to hold it in place, because as I said, I will be following up with some of Luke's terrain gunk, as I call it, in a short while, actually hopefully today. But this is to hold it in place until I get that in there. So what we'll do is we'll stick that in there, position it in nicely, and then with the clamp that will hold it in place and it won't fall off. So let me zoom that in for you. You can see there that that is just clamped in place with one of my beard clamps. And there's a big gap here which will be filled in, and there's going to be some more going around here, and then I'll fill in with Luke's APS's terrain mix. So I'm going to carry on with that, and I will invite you back when I have completed making the cliffs, when I've completed gluing them on. I'm now happy with how the bark is on that. When that is painted up and finished, it will look really good. Now some of you may have been shouting, why aren't you using hot glue? Which obviously would have been a far quicker process, but I found hot glue sometimes does crumble and fall apart, and it ends up not being very strong. The gator glue, on the other hand, is superb and just sticks and sticks and sticks. So the next step that I've got to do, squeaky, which I'm going to do a little bit of with you watching, and then I'm going to finish off without, because it won't be very interesting, is I'm going to make use of some of Luke's APS, that awesome guy, and the modelling compound. So I've got some here, and very, very simply I'm going to cover the entire model, apart from where I've put the actual bark, but I will fill in around the bark and etc. I'm going to cover the entire model with this, well, I suppose it's Sculptor mould. Now, one thing that I would suggest that you do is you make this in very small batches, very small indeed, because it does go off quite quickly, and you'll find it much easier to work with if, for example, you just take about that much of the modelling compound and then dribble in a very small amount of water. And you can make more and more and more all the time, and that means that you've always got fresh on tap, rather than making a huge batch and then, trust me, by the time you get to the end of it, you'll find that it's all dried inside your mixing thing and you're wasting it. So that's one of my top tips for you. If you're using this, mix a very, very small batch. I know some people do a lot. Maybe, I don't know, I'm doing something wrong. Maybe someone in the comments can tell me what I'm doing wrong, but that's how I like to do it. I like to have it in small batches and make it often, which is easiest. So you take that and then you slap it on wherever you want it to go. I'm going to start up here. Don't know why, I just am. And then you apply it. Simply, like that. And you can make the hill have a slope, as I'm doing there. Now what this will do is it will both cover over the textures you want, fill in the gaps, and also mean that all of your foam is covered. So if you end up using spray paints, which I'm not going to in this case, but if you do, then you have a spray safe model made of foam. So there we are. as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm actually going up to the cliff and filling in the gaps around the edges, which is another reason it does add that rigidity, because it dries quite nice and solid. And then smoothing it down, so I want this to be quite smooth, which is another reason to make small batches. Then when you've applied it, what I'm going to do is put my finger in the water just to keep my finger nice and wet, so that as I'm smoothing it I'm not dragging, because you don't want to drag. There we are. So what I'm going to do is the entirety of the rest of the model like that, and I'm probably going to do that over several sessions, because it is now time for me to have my evening and look after Rosie, and I'm looking forward to that, because that is the best part of being a daddy, is when you get to spend time with your daughter. But I did just want to start this off and get this little bit done, because also I want to finish this, and I'm really excited to see what it looks like. So I'll be back when that is completed and show you what it's like when it's covered in the sculptor mould type stuff. All of the compound is now nicely dry. So the next thing I'm going to do on this is I'm going to paint all of the cliff and everywhere that I want to have rock with black. First of all, I'm just going to put a solid coating of black over all of where the cliff wants to be. And that includes where I've filled in the middle between gaps with the compound. Okay, that'll do, I think, for now. I'll let that dry and I'll come back and touch up anywhere that I've really missed. The idea here is to cover the whole lot, because we are going to be bringing that up a lot lighter with a lot of different colours, greys and reds and greens and browns and what have you. And also you can see I've not been too worried about being totally clean and tidy, because the rest of it will be covered with brown paint, and there's a lot more to do on this. So I'm going to let that to dry now, and I'll be back the next time I have something to do. My black paint has dried, so now I'm going to be on with the dry brush. I've got a Nacodel brush here. Let's put the light a little bit better. There we are, Nacodel brush here with some grey paint, some dark grey. So I'm going to take that off on a bit of paper towel and then start to dry brush. Now the thing with dry brushing is that you want to make sure that you're not always going in the same direction. Move the brush randomly, so that you're not always getting strokes going the same way. Now the purpose of the first few dry brushes here is to give the base colour of the rock. Don't worry if you rub any of the black paint off, you can always cover that over with some flock later. I will get on with this and put some music on. just like that even, getting it into shot, with some light on it. So just like that, we have a really nice looking grey, but with lots and lots of shade and lots of shadow, as you can see. So the next thing to do, and don't clean your brush, is to introduce some white into that mix. And this is going to be a much lighter dry brush, a true dry brush. And what this is doing is catching just the tops. Much more subtle. However, it makes such a difference. And you can see just how quick this process actually is. Just get the edges. Use the same brush load to do the entirety of this dry brush. There we are, that's enough. Don't need to do more than that, I don't think. And just like that, you have a nice, dark, dingy looking rock, which is exactly the look I'm going for. Now, a couple of options you've got. You can start off without the black, you can go with the lighter underneath, and I'm not going to finish here, I'm going to put some other colours on it, but the base colour is for the shade and the nuts of the rock, the underneath of the rock, and then as you're dry brushing, you're looking at introducing more and more white, and I'm going to do some pure white when that's dried to do just the very tops, and that is to bring out all of the lovely details that there are on this rock. So yeah, that's looking really good. Onwards with the next step. With the stonework done to a level I'm happy with for now, I'm going to work on the rest of it, and I'm going to use the same technique as I did on the other hill. I'm going to use the terrain paint and my sifted sand. So I'll pop some music on and you can watch while I'm doing this. I've been sitting staring at this rock face, thinking and realising rocks aren't really that colour. Rocks have red, they have yellows, they have purples, and they definitely have greens. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some of these and my small dry brush, and I'm going to make it a bit more interesting. I still do want it to be mainly dark, but there does seem to be, it's just too uniform. There's no rock I know of is two-tone. So yeah, let's do this. What I'm going to do now on this hill is I'm going to paint over the whole lot again with the terrain paint. This will seal it and also give it the colour I want. So it will seal the sand that I scattered over the top, and it will also make sure that everything has the colour that I'm looking for. So I'm going to get on with that, and I'll play some music while I'm doing so. In the same way as I just did for the other hill, I'm going to paint this one with the brown paint to seal it and give it the colour I want. So I'll pop some music on and I will get started. Now we come to the magic bit, the bit where it really all comes together. In each of these pots I have a different colour of homemade flock made with sawdust and paint, and that's it. Very, very simple stuff, which I will do a video on at some point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to flock this lovely hill which I've made and turn it from looking like a bit of a brown mess to looking like a real hill. So I will move the camera a little bit so I can get to the bench, and then you can listen to the music while I apply the magic. The simplest is I use the terrain glue that I mix up, which is basically watered down PVA. I'll paint it on and then scatter each of the flocks in a way to make it look a little bit more natural. So slightly lighter where the paths are, slightly darker where there wouldn't be so much rain, and then lighter down the sides of the hills. That's the idea anyway. So yeah, I will shift things around and you can watch me as I work on this step. So that took about 15 minutes, just under, maybe 10 minutes. It didn't take very long. However, the thing to do on that is just not to rush. You need to think about what it will look like naturally. You also need to realise that as it dries, it will change. And I do prefer a slightly sparser look. Most hills have some of the soil coming through, and potentially one improvement would be to variate the colouring of the underneath a little bit. So maybe do some sand, leave some sand, paint mud in some places, and seal the sand that I put down on and I seal it with the brown paint, actually seal it just with PVA, so you get some variation of colour underneath it. However, that's going to look very nice. It really is going to come out well. I know that when it dries, so I'm going to go and take that to a warm place now, and next time you'll see it will be pretty much the last steps. I think that's the last thing I'm going to do. So that's the basic hill done. As you've just seen me with the basic hill, I'm now going to flock the advanced hill. So I'll pop some music on and you can watch while I do it. There we are, that's done. And I'm quite pleased with how that's turned out. I've done the path with sand and some stones on it. I did a bit of purple heather over this hill, which I'll probably bring out a bit more with another cover, but this is good enough for now. And I've put some moss on the cliffs, which is looking really nice. Just left it a bit sparse under the cliffs and quite rich over the back end. And I'm very pleased with how it looks. I'm going to leave that to dry in the warm room with the other one, and then I will show you what it looks like tomorrow, which will be basically finished. When is something done? There's a very interesting question. However, I think this is not quite done. It's very close, but it's not quite. Angela took one look at it yesterday and said that it needed to have some scruffy bits of grass growing along the edge here. And she's absolutely right. So what I've done is I've got myself some tufts. These ones are going to go on here because I wanted to have that as a heathery hillside. I'm going to take some of these tufts, I'm going to actually tear them up a bit and stick them in along the edge using the scenic glue, the fast tack glue. So let's get some glue in there where I want these to go, and then this is done. And I might put some up here, but I'll do that after. And then we'll take the tuft off of the sticky back, and I'm actually going to tear it up a bit. So I don't want all of that. I want it to be little bits. So we'll just stick a bit in there. I think. There we are. So that'll all nicely stick down and go off. And that, I think, completes the build. So I'm going to get some pictures and then I will wrap up shortly. So there you are. That was a longer video than I expected it to be, but it was a great fun build and I had a lot of joy making those hills, and I'm looking forward to getting them onto the table. I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope maybe you even managed to do a build along. If you did, then do send me some pictures. I would love to see them, and I will put them on a future video so that they could be shared with the community. Next up in this series is quite an awesome build. The magazine is all about making a gaming table, and so I've got some big plans. I'm not going to reveal them yet, you'll have to wait for that video to come out, but I'm sure that you'll enjoy watching that. Anyway, for now, if you're not yet a subscriber, please do click below and then don't forget to ding the bell so that you are informed by YouTube whenever one of these videos goes live. And last but very much not least, thank you very much for watching Beard Clipper.
Rasta. I was left here with my yesterdays, always thinking what I'd thrown away.